Hello, thanks for showing up for the webinar on co-regulation in couples and partnership. So I have a few slides, and my intention here is threefold actually. I want to deliver something of value that you all can take with you immediately. I want to keep this to about a half an hour so that you gain some things, but that you don't have to spend a whole lot of time today on this. And three, to just let you know more about what I do, some practices that are in my ebook, and what my work with couples is based on. And I really want to kind of bridge the science and the intention of all of this. And there's this premise that we'll start with, that we're all conscious beings. We want connection and integration and wholeness. We're all, as I believe, on a path to this integration and wholeness. And when we come into partnership, the partnership can be a mirror growth opportunity for us. And a lot of the times we're coming to relationship with trauma, and the trauma doesn't allow for the connection and our integration and our wholeness. And so we have dysregulation in the body's systems, dysregulation in the nervous system. And there's a lot of information out there about trauma and how it affects the body. Peter Levine, Bessel van der Kolk, they write amazing books on this topic. I don't have time to really go into that very much right now, but I'm going to give you an overview in a minute. All of the stories in relationship, this is a generalization, but I'm going with it. All of the stories in relationship can really be traced back to either how we affiliate with those traumas, how we identify with those traumas, or not, how we move through to integration and wholeness. So when we bring conscious awareness around our patterns, around our traumas, around what's going on in the body, when we bring that conscious awareness first to our own lives and then to our partnerships, it can significantly evolve a relationship. And the kind of work that I do is really about the evolution of relationship, going from sort of an old model of relationship that's like default, like trying to make romantic love work, into a very conscious union. There's more about that on my website. And so I have this methodology that I actually created, where what came to me sort of over my work with mindfulness and trauma and emotional and social supports and all of those things, it was, well, looking at how we're relating and looking at how we're relating in partnership. And often we have different needs. And like I said, we bring these traumas, and then we're not, like when we're operating in an old default pattern of relationship and not understanding how these things get in the way, we get stuck. And so I am all about bringing the consciousness to relationships. So let's talk about chronic stress and trauma. So this chart is pretty popular. It may have been Peter Levine initially, I don't know. And so, like, check this out. There's this lightning bolt right here. And in this zone, like where the dotted line is, that's called the zone of regulation, okay, or resilient zone. All right. So if I'm operating in this zone, like where that swervy line is, the curved line, I am able to stay with my thoughts, monitor my breath, have a rational conversation, those kinds of things. If I'm like bumped out of my zone of regulation, or my resilient zone, check this out. We have like hyper arousal and then hypoarousal, which means low. So this is like, low is depression and like I don't care much anymore, numbness, just like disconnect, right? And when you're up and out of your zone, this is where you're going to be like more anxious, irritability, mania, hypervigilance, right? So if something has, I have tended to be up here more in my personal trauma responses. So for years and years and years, I operated with deep anxiety. Sometimes I went down into the depression if it just felt overwhelming, but like most of the time I was just like getting more stuff done. I was in the hyper arousal. So if we're in the resilient zone, this is where we're able to be flexible, adaptable, pro-social behavior. So later I'm going to talk about empathy, compassion, like being able to be in those socially reciprocal relationships. And obviously, if we're in partnership, we want to be in something that is reciprocal, right? In this zone, there's also like where we organize, where that's what executive function means. And it says being responsive rather than reactive. So when I talk with people about mindfulness, I'm really talking about how much are we aware of our reactivity versus an awareness of our actions sort of metacognitively, where we can make a response, we can choose our response. And so the more we take care of our system and heal our system, the more we can stay in the resilient zone. Okay. So again, life is kind of constantly popping us all around. Like the triggers, these lightning bolts are going to be there. And like the triggers are different for all of us. So you could be living in a house with someone who's got very, very different triggers than you. That's like more likely than not, right? So let me talk about this. Actually, I want to tell a personal story just to kind of bring some of this home, because I love to tell story and I also understand the science. So it's both and. So a couple of years ago, and I had left my marriage, and my marriage was like very comfortable. It was almost like codependent, right? And there's no almost about it. It just was. And it wasn't very conscious, but it worked for us and like in this perceived safety for a long time. When that was over, I had not been with another person. I hadn't been in relationship, for a long time. And so it was, given the trauma that I held in my body and my nervous system, it was actually really, really difficult for me to like think about like dating anyone else or being with anyone else. If you all know me at all, there's like not one casual bone in my whole body. So like even dating was like this lightning bolt, quite honestly. And so long story short, what ended up happening was that I entered a relationship with a dear friend. And what ended up happening was that his like physical body was a safe resource for my physical body, probably like for the very first time in my life. And I was in my 30s, and I didn't know that kind of safety could exist. And so, I had had 2 children. I had been married for a number of years. I had been in a relationship for 14 years. I was an adult. I was a professional. I had like a couple of master's degrees, right? Like I was operating in the world. And I actually, so I could go through the motions, but like I didn't feel actually safe in my body most of the time. Like my nervous system was very, very, very fragile. I actually ended up with extreme adrenal fatigue by the age of like 32. Okay. So when this human turned out to be very safe and met my system in a very safe way, it actually brought me into this resilience zone. Now, that's a very long story short, right? But this really, really impacted my life because in partnership, sometimes we show up and just we're expected to be very perfect, or we don't want to have to heal the other person, that kind of thing. What I'm saying is we're showing up to relationship with trauma. So what happens when you bring a trauma informed approach and it's naturally healing, naturally removing, or you can't say removing entirely, but naturally decreasing the triggers and the stress events and increasing the safety, then you're going to spend more time in this zone where you're able to connect. Okay. So I'm blending what we know about trauma and what we know about connection and relationship. So, okay. So people come to work with me. I work with couples for 90 days, and depending on where they are and how much riff is in their connection, we're going to start with like two parallel tracks. I sometimes say like I'm coaching, quote unquote, three entities. It's partner A, partner B, and the relationship itself. Okay. And the reason that we do that is because by the time you're in partnership for a while, sometimes you don't know whose stuff belongs to whom, right? Like who started it and who needs what. Like you almost like have so much blending, right? And so we kind of like pull apart and allow space for individuals to be individuals again. And most of my couples find a great relief in this. Like, oh, okay, you do you for a couple of weeks and I'm going to do me. And then I'm talking with each person and we're having joint sessions too. And what happens in that space is that many things, but for the purposes of this webinar, we learn self-regulation. We learn personal attunement. So what does it look like when I'm in this zone of resiliency? What does it look like for me? Like, how do I get myself there? How do I track my breathing, track what I'm feeling in my body? Okay. So we're always in coaching, if we're going for a holistic approach, we're looking at the body, we're looking at the mind, the emotions, the spirit, and then I'm going to add the energy. Okay. And so when I'm teaching you mindfulness and personal attunement, you're looking at the body, the sensations, emotions. If you have the emotional language, I'm going to talk more about emotions in a minute. But emotions can also be tracked in the body. So if I'm scared, I'm going to like contract, right? But if I'm loving, I'm going to expand. And so even tracking expansion and contraction tells me about my emotions, even if I don't have the words for my emotions. Mentally, what is my mind doing? That's a mindfulness skill. And then, spiritually, that's a bigger topic, but what is my capacity to love in this moment, that kind of thing. So the more regulated we are, the more self-regulation we have, the more we're in the zone of resiliency, the more able we are to connect, the more able we are to have a rational conversation. And it's not like a self-control, but it's a homeostasis. Like it just feels good. Okay. So again, if we're bumping out of this zone of resiliency, then we need tools to get us back into the zone of resiliency. Okay. So here's what I was going to say about emotions. I had this wonderful conversation with one of my clients just today, and I added this slide, and she was really wanting to talk to her husband about her emotional experience. And the thing in the middle that they both, want was sex. And she really wants to have the emotional conversation, and he doesn't, right? He's got, I wasn't talking to him, so I can't speak for really what he wanted. But she was understanding that there's this, he can do that. He can engage in sex without the emotional safety. And I need the emotional safety, right? And so she was trying to engage him in an emotional conversation, and that wasn't working. They were getting frustrated. And she said, But how do I feel safe if not for the words? So many, many, many times we're looking for like the affirmation to come through us verbally. You know, we're like very cognitive creatures. We do a great job thinking about things. And yet we want connection and safety on an emotional level, on a body level. Okay. So what I'm talking to couples about is like, yeah, acknowledge what the head is doing, but also come into the body. And I teach couples attunement exercises. They're in my ebook that you actually don't talk. You just don't talk for the duration of the activity until you're processing it in the reflection questions that you do with each other. But during the activity, what you're doing is noticing what's going on in your mind and body, where you're expanding and contracting, how close you're willing to be to the other person, working with proximity, just listening to the attunement of the entire system, and and working with the nonverbal cues of connection from that space. So we don't actually have to talk about emotions, because what we can do is, like, even especially if we're bumped out of that zone of resiliency and we're in a conflict, we want to start attuning to our own system. Many, many times couples from that place of dysregulation are trying to talk, right, without the regulation. And the cognitive processing about a bodily or emotional experience can't really work. And we know that there's this like tension between how much we want to talk about emotions. I mean, often it's like a male, female, gender, it's made into a gender thing, you know. And emotional intelligence is super, super important. And like being willing to sit in a vulnerability around an emotional experience is very important. But we don't get that safety to be able to do so if we're bumped out of our zone of resiliency, or if we're telling our partner about their own experience. So what we do is spend those first couple of weeks really noticing what's going on with us, and then we speak and share from our own notices. Okay. So when we're noticing sensations in the body, like I've used expansion and contraction a lot, or like my heart space is warm, or my shoulders are up around my ears. You know, like this is the body giving us information, which sounds really simple, but in our culture of like go, 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 we're really very, very far from spending an adequate amount of like time or effort in generating this relationship to our own body. And so when we speak from the notices, you know, so if my partner's sitting across from me and I don't feel safe, I can say, yeah, I understand that you really want to have sex right now, but right now in my body, there is some clenching in my stomach, and I'm pulling back in my seat. And so I'm not available to have that kind of intercourse right now, or a relationship right now. I think what I might be available for is to like hug lying down with my clothes on, you know? And so I'm checking in with me, and I'm honoring my own experience. I'm saying how I am available. When I do that, what we're going to get naturally is increased empathy, compassion, and connection. Because I'm making it about me and my experience. And if I say that my stomach is clenching up, if my partner is my caring partner at all, there's going to be some natural empathy that's evoked from that space, some natural compassion. And when I'm talking about I'm really talking about developing these skills over time. So I work with couples for 90 days in a very naturally progressive, very safe way. And so we're incorporating these skills, building one on top of the other. And so the empathy, compassion, and connection works really well. Now, let's say my partner like really has a need for connection as well, right? And he thinks that like his connection need right now is about intercourse. And I'm just not available for that right now, but I'm talking about my experience. I can also hear his experience. I can also, maybe when he shares from his experience, it actually opens up my heart connection to him, and then I'm able to say like, oh, I think if we just like spend 10 minutes hugging, I'll probably be in a different spot, And so it's it takes that, oh my gosh, the feelings of rejection, the feelings of defensiveness, the feelings of blame, and it just decreases them so much. So when we bring mindfulness to relationships, it's so dang simple, but it's also so revolutionary because we are used to high expectations of each other without really attuning to the truth of the system, the truth of the moment. And so, given also, I mentioned it, but the busyness of our daily lives at this point in time, we are very much used to being bumped out of our zone of regulation. And so if we're going in hyperarousal all day long, and then crash into bed beside our partner and they're like, hey, do you want to have sex? We're like, no, why would I? Like, I don't feel good. Okay. And so y'all know what I'm talking about with that one. And so there's like, well, how do we cultivate this in our daily lives, in our relationship? We start real simple. Like we start with a mindfulness practice, noticing breath, noticing body, noticing emotion, noticing expansion, contraction. And over time, we have way more expansion, way more connection, compassion. So you came for a webinar on co-regulation. So when you develop the skills of self-regulation in your relationship, two people doing that, then you can develop co-regulating. And again, this is the topic of my ebook, so I really recommend picking that up from my website. So when we have the ability to attune to ourselves, and that takes a little bit of time, right, and training and self-inquiry, we can also start to attune to our partner. Now you do this, like if you're in the kitchen and your partner comes home and they like throw the bag of groceries on the ground, like they're giving you signals that of like what's going on inside of them, right? There are also like more subtle signals. You're not responsible for like detecting and like being hypervigilant about your partner. I'm not talking about that. That would not be as conscious as I'm talking about relating. But you might purposefully, this is what I'm advocating for, that you are purposefully taking the time to attune to one another, to notice what you notice. So I'm kind of, I'm over the days of like, I'm not really feeling available. I know he wants it. I'm going to go ahead and just not feel great about it, but give it. I am a proponent of like some give and take, right? But to attune with one another first is going to build the connection so that there's beauty in the way that you're relating, which we all want, right? So conscious attunement can be a breath practice together. I have exercises in my ebook where you can practice attuning to one another even over a point of conflict. And then there are exercises that work out the conflict without ever having to talk about it. It's so good. So when we're co-regulating, we're each taking responsibility for ourselves as human beings, like as embodied beings. And we are noticing what's going on the inside of us. And then we're also attuning to our partner to see where they are. So you probably have had an experience where like you were feeling really relaxed, but you get up close to your partner and they're like super anxious. And you're like, well, what's going on? And you start to feel pretty super anxious too, right? And so this is like, if you're attuning, you're going to feel a little anxious. But if you can go back to your self-regulation, you're going to invite your partner to match your breath. Just this happens biologically, it happens naturally. And then, you know, like pretty soon you're both going to be like down regulating. Okay. So I don't know about you all, but I would much rather have intimacy and sex and connection in that regulation than I would like a hyper arousal where we're just sort of not really feeling in the moment and we're tense, but we're like getting the act done. Like that is not the kind of sex that I'm advocating that anyone have. Okay. You can like rub parts together all day and have orgasm, but that is not true relating. So this is all a very quick overview, but you can see the difference between consciously connecting and regulating with the breath and unconscious rubbing parts together, right? So one really simple exercise to do with your partner is to match your in-breath with your out-breath, match your inhale with your exhale, and just purposefully do that. You know, you can like lay in bed, chest to chest, and just feel each other breathing. And then anytime we're doing these exercises with one another, you know, you're just like curious. So let's say your partner's like got a really fast breath and just like can't seem to slow down. You're just curious about that. And like what wants to happen? You're not like, damn it, you can't breathe more slowly. You know, you're just conscious, like, or I'm just curious and loving and open and tracking your breath. And that's where you're staying attuned and self-regulated to you. Okay. So wonderful. Usually there's a consult for there's a consult fee for my consults for couples. And if you schedule when you watch this video, I'll waive the consult fee. You can just send me an email and let me know. And then if you mention this webinar, you can receive 25% off the full 90-day coaching package when you sign up by March 8th. And I just wanted to extend that for anyone who's excited now while they're watching it. What I do is very different than therapy. What I do is a 90-day coaching for couples. It's very unique. It's very effective. It works very, very well for couples who already have some patterns of consciousness. Like, you know, they generally try to be the best people that they are, and they've done maybe some like men's work, some women's work. I talk a lot about men and women and masculinity and femininity. I am in no way attached to your gender. Like I work with any gendered human. I don't care how you identify, any gender, any sexual orientation. And I want to be just like real clear about that. I work with humans and I look at the space between and how we relate to each other. So forgive me for being so heteronormative so much of the time. So yes, any couple welcome, 25% off if you sign up and commit by March 8th. And my website is listed here and the ebook is available now. So, oh my gosh, it's so exciting to see couples diving into this ebook. You know, spend a couple of weeks with it, like really go through the practices and attune to one another. I think if you flipped to like the back page, the last exercise, and quickly tried to do the last co-regulation exercise and answer the questions, like you might get something from it, but it's also a progression, right? So if you know me at all, you know that I'm deep, I'm authentic. I like to really go to the places that matter and the places that really, really, really affect change and develop deep soulful connections in our lives. So I am going to stop there, and I look forward to hearing from you. And oh, there we go, I did it. Yeah, let me know if you have questions and how I can be of support. All right. Thank you, good people.